As you think about the amount of money you need to improve the premise and make it ready for your respective use, 3 core things to think about. The first is, what is the current condition of the space? The second is, what sort of investment is the landlord going to put in the space on your behalf? We call it the landlord work as defined in the toolkit. And the third is the landlord going to put in any money that they're giving to you as an allowance for you to improve the space? Of course, all this is dependent upon you understanding what you need to occupy the space. And that's why, as we elaborate on the toolkit, as we've spoken to so many of you about, you first need to know what you need to operate. You need to go through and come up with your budget. And then once you understand your budget, as you tour space and get that one space has a bathroom, one space doesn't, one space has a kitchen, one space doesn't, the landlord's gonna do the HVAC on one and not the other, then you can start comparing spaces and relative budgets and know how much you need to put in. The last thing I'll say is that I think it's really important that you negotiate from the very earliest moment of even that first tour and understand the work the landlord's gonna do or the budget the landlord is gonna put in. And you know, the other thing we think a lot about at Graffito as we're talking about spaces, whether or not that space is gonna be delivered as is, meaning in the condition you're touring it, like with no landlord work and the landlord not touching it, or with certain landlord work. And if you look in the toolkit and you look at the landlord work letter we have in the back, that's a really good example of a document that shows just the potential amount of work and variation of that work the landlord can do versus the tenant performing on their own behalf. So you're one of the lucky ones who gets a tenant improvement allowance, or as we've defined in the toolkit, TIA, as we talk about short form. And the question is, what is it and how do you use it? So the what is, this is an allowance that a landlord gives to a tenant to improve the space. It is almost always limited to hard costs, meaning it is almost always limited to items which are permanent physical investments in the space. Things like HVAC, hard plumbing, electrical, things that, by the way, once you leave the space for whatever reason, will stay with the leasehold and are used by a subsequent tenant, which is largely one of the justifications for a landlord giving you an allowance because it is their space. They own it. So that's what the allowance is. The question is, how is it administered and paid? And that's something you're gonna wanna work really closely with your general contractor, your architect, and potentially your attorney on to make sure that the timing of that payment is such where it does in fact allow you to bring less money to the table. So as a quick example, if the landlord says, we'll give you $100 a square foot to improve your premise, it's a 1,000 square foot premise, so you're getting $100,000. If they say, we're not gonna give you that money until you open for business, that doesn't really help you from a sources of funds perspective because you still need to spend that money. Whether or not you get that money through debt or raise it through otherwise, if the money comes at the very end, you have to raise it. So we oftentimes do on the deals that we're on the landlord side and tenant side is make sure that there's some sort of schedule for which that money is paid, but the work still will have to be performed before that money is reimbursed by the landlord. So think a lot about the timing of it and the process for which that reimbursement happens. And that's where, again, you want to be talking to your architect and your builder to make sure you have a team that can deliver what a landlord needs to make that reimbursement so you can get access to the tenant improvement allowance.